Hello, welcome to the Batavia Public Library. My name's Kristen Zambo, and I'm the Promotional Services Manager here. And with me is our library's Executive Director, George H. Sheets. Hi, George. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Glad to be here with you today.
Thank you, me too.
So we're going to talk about Preservation Week.
Yes, Preservation Week is going to be an entire week-long event. It begins on Sunday, April 30th, and it goes through Saturday, May 6th. It's all about the importance of preserving our present-day photos, mementos, documents, memorabilia, as well as preserving those from past generations as well.
Absolutely.
And you're pretty much a history buff. An understatement.
I very much am very interested in local history, and Batavia has such a rich history, and there are surprisingly many gaps in Batavia's history because of lack of resources, and so it's important to save and preserve and sometimes repair and store safely some of the artifacts and memorabilia and letters and postcards and yearbooks and school newspapers and things that the people don't always think are worth saving.
Right. Well, and you're making a good point, because not everything that we think of is worth preserving. Some things you may not even consider it.
Absolutely. It's over the years I've talked to a lot of families, and usually I start off by saying, especially when something sad has happened, someone has passed away, that sort of thing, I will mention to the family members that keep the library and in mind, and anything we cannot use here, we will pass on to the Depot Museum. We're very collaborative in terms and complementary in terms of how we collect and preserve local history.
What are some examples of that?
Well,
is it just kind of yearbooks and
it's interesting.
Polaroids, or
you never quite know what's going to walk in the door.
Okay.
And but typically, when I tell people that we're especially interested in paper records, such as school newspapers, school club brochures and flyers, yearbooks, local newspapers, things like that, many times people will express surprise, because they don't necessarily, that's not what they're thinking. And I understand from some of our colleagues in the museum that oftentimes what people think are important are the sort of the personal mementos that people saved, souvenirs from trips and tchotchkes and things like that really may have nothing to do with Batavia.
So that little seashell that you picked up when you went on vacation, or Grandma went on vacation to Cancun.
It's a lovely memento of your relative, but it has little or nothing to do with local history.
Yeah.
And oftentimes what seems to happen is many of the things that are important for a community's history end up being thrown away, and the things that end up being saved are the mementos.
So example would be maybe like someone had a picnic for their church or for like their social club, and you've got a whole bunch of the members that are lined up to get that nice cute picture.
Yeah.
Would that be something that would be worth?
Well, actually, a photographic record of local events and parties and community celebrations and things like that, whether it's a club or a church or a community-wide event, those are important, especially if the names are preserved.
And it's not just mom. You can't just write mom.
No, that's true. That's true. I can speak from personal experience because my parents at some point dug out all the old family photographs for generations and put them all in wonderful binders, and then didn't label any of them. But of course, so we heard them telling the stories about the pictures and who were in the pictures, but both my parents passed away before we actually got it all written down. And so we have, my siblings and I have sort of vague memories of, this is definitely, our great-grandfather.
Okay.
This might be his sister, we're not exactly sure, you know what I'm saying?
And they don't have the full name on the back.
They don't have, like in many cases, any name on the back. So.
And that would be really important to go through and make sure that you have a record of mom's
Absolutely.
full name, dad's full name, great-grandma, aunts, uncles.
Especially for your family history, but also sometimes community history, because your relative may have been a longtime store owner or professional person in Batavia, and as part of the fabric of our lives here. We have a beautiful photograph from 1919 of all the returning veterans and a nurse, actually.
Oh.
There's one woman in the picture from World War I.
Really? And it's fully labeled with proper names?
It has no names. In fact, there's only one person is identified positively.
Okay.
And no one has ever been able to find a record that anybody wrote down of all the names of the people on the pictures. So it's a wonderful picture.
Right.
We know many of the people that were actually in the war from other records, but we just don't always know which person is which, and it's difficult in a large panoramic photograph to pick people out. So,
Right.
so that's a classic example of, I've heard our mayor say more than once, he just wished somebody had written this down. And he said he when he was younger, he says many of these people were still alive and they could have actually looked at the photograph and
Exactly.
identified them. So,
And now they can't.
exactly.
Right.
So, but not to dwell too much on things like that, because there's so much that is important to our history, and it may be an artifact, a local artifact. It could be a postcard or a mailing from a long gone millinery store or men's store here in town. It could be a photograph of one of the fraternal organizations in town. It could be what have you. It's interesting. The library is a good example of what didn't happen, in that there are almost no early interior photographs of any of the former library buildings. And it's just, there may have been photographs, but we don't have any photographs. So that's an example of here the library itself was not really doing a great job.
Right. Which is why it's so
documenting
important.
itself, yes. So I'd love to see what the Newton House looked like in the 20s and 30s and 40s.
Right.
Would have loved to see what some of our East Side branch libraries look like on the inside.
Well, what about even maps? Would maps that people have be helpful,
Maps are important.
or like plats of survey for property or neighborhoods?
Well, that's a good question. We now have in the library a large county map hanging on the wall in our northeast reading room, and it is huge. First off, surrounded by advertising from different communities in the county, including an ad for the Challenge Company in Batavia.
Oh, cool.
But it is also a plat map, and so it shows all the property owners at that time throughout the entire county.
And now how could that be helpful, for example, to someone researching their own family's history
Well,
or the history of Batavia?
Well, people do house histories, people do genealogies, but at one point this area was largely rural, and so people owned, even people that maybe lived in town had farms in many cases, or owned land.
Okay.
And in the map I'm talking about in our reading room here, one of our employees knew that her grandparents had a farm in St. Charles Township, and she came out and she found it on that map. So now she knows exactly where that farm was.
Right.
Because by the time she had grown up, that farm was probably long since developed and things
Developed
like that.
and the land was subdivided for subdivisions.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I've got with me a plat book. They're often called farm plat books and such. And these go county, it's for all of Kane County. And I'm going to find, I'm not going to find, but it shows the whole county. And basically the geographical features, the rivers, and where the locations of the various communities are. And then there's a page for each township, and so we have...
and those are more finite maps where it's much more detailed and more scale.
Exactly. Because, the print is not huge, but it is very readable, and it shows all the sections in the township, and it shows all the individual properties. outside of the incorporated community. So St. Charles is shown as hash marks because that's the city. But all the properties in that township and who owned them at this particular time are identified. And that's a great way to, in general research, how did the area develop? It helps there. And sometimes people refer to a given area as, there's one community I know that refers to this one area as Old Farm. Well, whose farm?
Right.
Whose Old Farm?
Right.
Well, here you can find out.
You can find out who it was.
If no one remembers who Old Farm was, here's a map. So maps can be very useful for a lot of different types of information.
Well, and I'm betting that a number of people, especially when you have older family members that pass, that these items are put in boxes, hopefully put in boxes, but then they might be stuck in the attic, or they might be down in the basement. And honestly, these days, how many times does a basement flood?
Well, that's just it. And sometimes it's in a drawer in the china cabinet or whatever. A lot of the plat books we have, and we have at least 20 different ones.
Okay.
Sadly, the publishers almost never put the year of publication in the plat books.
Oh.
And the people that bought them often did not label it.
Okay.
So like for example, this one is old enough that it still has the
old way that telephone systems worked.
The old telephone exchange names or letters, as opposed to.
So you can kind of date it that it was before 1970 or it was before 1940.
Exactly. Well, in this case, it probably was before the 60s.
Okay.
But probably, depending on the size of the community, after the mid-50s.
Okay.
For example, in the Tri-City area here, Batavia, Geneva, and St. Charles did not get exchanges for direct dial until about 1957, 58, 59, somewhere in that range. And it was a big to-do when these new numbers showed up. Before, it was like the library's number was Batavia, to let people know what exchange it was, 1393, which is still our number now, 879-1393.
Exactly.
So it became Tremont 9-1393 because Batavia's exchange was Tremont or TR, so TR 9.
Oh, interesting.
1393.
Okay.
And each community, of course, had its own.
Has their own individualized.
Right, and the AT&T and the phone companies generally across the country tried to. They had selected names, sort of an authorized list of names, and they tried to use not similar ones right next door to one another. So that would be just confusing. So if something has a zip code, that means it was published or appeared or happened in 1964 or later, because zip codes began to be used in 1964.
Right. Well, and thankfully this material was preserved to the point that that kind of numeric sequencing is visible. It's not water damaged. It doesn't have, it wasn't subject to fire. It wasn't so beaten and battered that you can't read it.
We have some that are in worse condition than this one, which is in excellent condition.
Right. Well, and there are special boxes and special sleeves, special containers that things should be kept in. I know we have a number of items that are stored in special boxes.
May not want to take that level of effort, but I think just keeping local family and local community materials that you value or that may be valuable to the community for research in a safe, dry, relatively cool location.
And you'd want it out of sunlight, because we've all seen how newspapers will turn yellow and brittle. Frankly, everything.
Sunlight and actually even fluorescent lights are not necessarily great for.
And no wild temperature swings like you were mentioning.
Absolutely. Although a lot of times things will end up in a storage unit or something, and then those are subject to that. But it's just good to have those things. And if families think about bringing that sort of stuff to the library, it helps us do research.
Well, we can maintain that and then preserve that, not only for current
Absolutely.
generations, but for future generations.
Well, absolutely. We have a lot of documents like that. We have older phone books, for example. So
Okay.
this one's from February 1934. Back in that era, there were 2 published a year, usually in the early part of the year, in the first half of the year, and the
Okay.
second half of the year. And this particular one covers Batavia, Geneva, and St. Charles. So from time immemorial, the Tri-Cities have been treated as the Tri-Cities.
Exactly.
And they're valuable not only for the personal information in there, but they're also valuable because of the business information.
Absolutely.
Sometimes it's the only record of a particular business might
Right.
exist in here.
So if, for example, you have a family who wants to do some research and come to the library and do some research, they might pull a phone directory to see, I want to know where my ancestors lived.
Well, you can
but you
find-
might find their business advertisements.
You could very, very easily.
Okay.
Exactly. And not only can you find their, if you find their name, you can find their address and their telephone number, which is sometimes interesting to find out what their telephone number was.
Yeah.
But some of the, and for outside of Batavia in the county, some of these early ones, all the way in the back, so this one has a directory for Elburn and Lily Lake.
Oh my gosh.
I don't know why they chose Elburn
Right.
and Lily Lake. But so here is all the people in Elburn and Lily Lake with their telephones back in 1934.
But it also has their addresses. So
It-
if
it
you're
does.
even moving to a certain area and you know, this is the home that I've just moved into, I want to do some research on my house,
Yeah.
you can actually look up and see, well, in such and such a year, this family lived here. This was their name.
Well, it's interesting because in many cases, these are rural addresses. So you'll see, instead of a street address, it'll say like, here's
It's like a rural route.
E. Mark Abramson Hardware.
It says what they did for a living.
Sometimes, yeah.
Okay.
Lily Lake, but Lily Lake had an Elburn exchange
Yeah.
number, which is interesting.
Well, but it gives that little clue
Yeah.
that you can kind of carry forward.
Yeah, there's a lot of information here because
Yeah.
the little R means that's the residence.
Okay.
So as in cases like that, so all these R's.
Right.
But sometimes the address is Virgil Township, Caneville Township.
Yeah.
Now residence is Gates or Pierce. I'm not even familiar with where those communities
Right,
even were.
right.
So that's the
Yeah.
value of older maps. So
Well, and, I mean-
where was Gates, Illinois?
Exactly.
In Kane County.
And now you get to do more research to kind of
Absolutely.
figure that out.
And while it doesn't look very yellow, these are the yellow pages.
Oh, yeah.
The business directory for the communities. And in this case, the communities are listed separately. They
Yeah.
each have their own alphabet
Okay.
going on.
Well, and when you're lucky enough to actually have the house number, you're then able to research the history of your house. And we have a
Absolutely.
program that's coming up the beginning of May. It's going to be May 4th at 7 p.m. That's a Thursday. It's Questions and Ancestors. It's part of our genealogy series. And it's all about researching the history of your home because your house has a story too. Just like families have stories,
Absolutely.
a house can say so much about the community and all of the different individuals who've lived there over time.
Absolutely.
And this is going to be a phenomenal program to really, if you're a first-time researcher, or even if you've done a little bit of research, but you haven't dived in fully, this would probably be a really good opportunity to kind
Absolutely.
of kick that ball rolling or continue on to the next level.
One of the most popular or recurring questions we get about local history is about individuals' houses. They bought a new house. They found out it was built in the 19th century. So who lived there?
Right.
That sort of thing. And what was the community like at that time? And we had a former employer who's since moved from the community, but she and her husband actually bought a house on the east side, and it was owned by, it turned out to have been built by a man who was a doctor in the Civil War. And they
wow.
learned all kinds of interesting things about this gentleman. And,
Oh, that's interesting.
and it is, it's like,
Yeah.
it opens up a door into history in a way that we don't normally encounter.
Well, and it makes it personal. I mean,
It
these
does.
people, they lived in your house. They slept in
Absolutely.
possibly your bedroom.
Absolutely.
You know, they had children, they celebrated milestones, and it's that connection that they're not that much different than you and I.
Well, absolutely. And Batavia is an old community in terms of its founding. It was first settled in 1833.
It's amazing.
The oldest homes that are still standing actually date from the 1840s in our community. And then, every decade since. So there's a lot of history to be had in Batavia
Right.
in terms of how sometimes larger properties were subdivided and developed.
Yeah.
The land around the Batavia Institute on the west side of Batavia, that was a huge property that had greenhouse and orchards and things like that, and now it's all developed. So you can find old maps
Yeah.
that show what all this was, and then you can see where your newer home or
And you can
condos-
track that over time.
You can. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So the program in our Questions and Ancestors series is going to be a great leaping off point.
Absolutely.
But ultimately, a lot of research on your house's history in terms of who owned it and such is going to be found at the county courthouse, in the recorder's office.
true.
The old property records and things like that.
So that when deeds are transferred, you have that record.
Absolutely, especially if the property was started off as farmland and then
Okay.
became developed. You
Okay.
can it was possible to follow that history and then find out when it was platted as
Okay.
a subdivision of the city. And
So you can see when it first was developed.
exactly,
Okay.
exactly, and it can be quite fascinating.
Absolutely.
I think, so, yeah.
Well, thank you so much, George. This is fascinating.
Oh.
I hope that a number of people come to the library during Preservation Week. We have a number of resources that are online, in print here in the local history room, and our reference desk librarians are spectacular. They
Absolutely.
absolutely relish helping individuals learn more about themselves and their families and our community.
Absolutely, and if your family are a long-time residents of Batavia, we do have some biographical binders that the Historical Society has prepared that has some family history in it.
Okay.
We have city directories which are fascinating because they include they're both an alphabetical list by name, but they also have records in order by street name and then address within the street, so
Oh,
you can see who
perfect.
the neighbors were and that sort of thing.
Oh, see, that's fascinating.
And then it's also got the newer ones, especially, will have a section which this older one does not have of telephone numbers, so you can get. The beauty of a city directory, and we have them. They still make these. They're published by the R.L. Polk Company.
Yep.
And so it's alphabetical by name, alphabetical by street, and then by number, and then numerical by telephone number. So it's a way to track down.
It's like a crisscross. You can look it up one way or
In
another.
fact, that's another brand of directory
Right.
called the crisscross
Right.
directory, and that's exactly what the point of it is.
Exactly.
If you have one piece of information, you can find out something else.
Right.
So if you have a flyer that from 100 years ago or 50 years ago that has the name of the business and the telephone number, if you can't find it one way, you might be able to find it the other way in terms
Right.
of where it was located
Right.
in town. This is great for family research as well. City directories, the telephone directories. Online, we've digitized many, but not all of Batavia's newspapers, and it's amazing what one can find.
Absolutely.
Especially in the personals column, because it tells who's visiting Batavia,
Yeah.
who's from Batavia has gone to visit other people,
Right.
and where, and
Well, and that shows where relatives live, so you can help kind of tentacle
right.
out in a family story.
that's absolutely right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Well, and that was big news.
Oh.
You're going to go visit Aunt Margaret in Virginia,
absolutely.
and I mean that made the round of news.
That's right. And the older newspapers are just full of that kind
Yeah.
of stuff, and along with the other regular news of the day, you get a lot of things that people would be probably appalled to see in the newspaper now. But that was one of
Yeah.
the purposes of the newspaper.
It wasn't just over the fence line gossip. It
Right.
was news.
Absolutely, because the communities were not huge, and people wanted to know where everybody was, and
Right.
what they were doing.
Exactly.
And in a positive way.
And
I
what
think.
so-and-so's boy was up to.
Yeah, and every honor you'd get, and every time your child would perform in a singing contest or things like that, or in a spelling bee, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And we have all those records. So many of them that you can actually trace that yourself.
Absolutely. So the digitized newspapers are searchable online.
Right.
At the BataviaHistory.org site. Batavia History is one word. But we have on microfilm Batavia newspapers from 1893 to the present, and then some scattered other issues. And we have also we have the Beacon News from its beginning into the 19-teens, because a lot of Batavia news was published in the Aurora newspaper.
Right.
So that's also something that I think not everyone thinks of immediately back
Exactly.
in the day. Aurora had the daily newspaper, Batavia had a weekly newspaper, so a lot of local information.
Went into the daily newspaper as well. Absolutely.
It's funny sometimes that you find you not mention it all in Batavia, but you'll find it in some other neighboring town's newspaper. So it was like it was news to that town.
Yeah.
But in Batavia, it was like, eh. So it's funny, but it's but it helps with research just to
Absolutely.
know how to think, beyond the boundaries.
You can't just stay so minute and so locally focused. You have to branch out a little bit.
Absolutely. And here at the library, our great librarians are ready to help people get started.
Absolutely.
And answer all kinds of questions in this regard.
So please stop by. We encourage everyone during Preservation Week, please stop by the library. We have a wealth of resources available. A number of them are online. Many of them are in print. And it's okay to have questions. Our librarians love to answer questions, and they kind of relish that challenge of helping you find out and uncover your own family story.
Absolutely, and we really haven't talked a lot about genealogical resources, but we have there's tons of good genealogical resources.
Absolutely.
And many publications related to this area that were produced by the King County Genealogical Society.
Right.
Cemetery indexes to cemeteries.
Birth and date records, death date.
And all of this can be helpful in tracking down some elusive clue to find that next relative.
Exactly.
So, anyway,
well, thank you very much. I appreciate this.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And please come to the library during Preservation Week. We would love to help you uncover your own story.